The Prince likes pies. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
I've got pies in my eyes. The Pi500 Plus looks yummy.
The Prince of Persia speaks. Jordan Mechner's blog post about his iconic game sparks more questions.
Gruedness Me. Someone is obsessed with Infocom. Actually, more than one person.
And a new Atari 2600 hack and slash, along with Sir Clive Sinclair memories, coming up on this week's show for the week of the 4th of October, 2025.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Did you miss me last week? No?
Well, you're not there.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Hello, I'm back. Apparently, nobody missed me last week. I did enjoy the show. I did enjoy listening. I did really think you nailed Baldur's Gate 2 right down. It's such an important game. They tried so many times to get D&D right, and they finally did. And then after that, it all went to action focused from that on. So, absolutely brilliant game. Really enjoyed last week's show. But we've got loads this week again. Loads this week. Shall we get right into it? Shall we?
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that our nostalgia is not only linked to the machines we grew up with, but also the form factor, the look and feel, the compactness and yet completeness of the machines we first lusted over and then owned. And in the 80s, that meant a computer with ports on the back and side with a built-in keyboard that we just plugged into the TV, turned it on, and off we went. No installation, no configuration, no signing our privacy away. And an all-in-one keyboard computer, it was, they just worked. So, things like the C64, the BBC Micro, the Acorn Electron, the Spectrum, the Amiga 500, 600, 1200, and yes, even Dave's beloved Amstrad CPC, and the Atari ST. They all fall within what we now lovingly call the wedge-shaped microcomputer. Before we actually go on with this story, guys, favorite wedged microcomputers, guys?
Well, you know what I'm going to say here. In fact, you've told me already. It's the Amstrad CPC, but I'm thinking over which one it is, and probably I think the one that looks the best is the 664, the very rare one, the kind of the blue and grey one with a built-in disk drive. It really looks the part, although having had one, they're not so great to type in compared to a 6128. I feel the 6128, they're too high up. And of course, the Atari ST looks absolutely phenomenal. Jason agrees with me. In fact, we don't even need to ask him. He's got the same answers.
I'm still sitting here thinking about are we going to call it the Amstrad 66.4? I think somebody tells me that I mangle Amstrad model numbers. So, Chris, does it need to be a true wedge shape to qualify? Like, the original C64? Okay, so any just sort of slab, the slab with the keyboard, and the keyboard is also the computer.
Yes.
Yeah, and in that case, I mean, the Commodore 64 clearly, but the A500, it packed a lot into what was a very large and heavy wedge. So
it's
a lot
true
for that, but yeah, because there's kind of two categories of wedgedom, right? There's kind of the big desktop slab, and then there's we're going to make this as tiny as we can, and often we're going to give you a lot of keyboard trade-offs for that. So there's at least two schools of wedge design thought. So
that's true.
I mean, you're going to call a 48K Spectrum a wedge. I mean, it is a wedge by that, but it's not really wedge shaped, and it doesn't look like a.
And that's why I was asking, because like the 64C, the later redesign is much more of a true wedge.
Wedge. Yeah,
just the slab.
Wedges. So, we're talking about wedges.
Right, so I'd probably give Jupiter Ace some time here just for being a weirdo wedge. Like what a strange, bizarre little guy.
That's true.
The desktop slab, quite a concept, and its day. I don't know. Did its day ever leave us, Chris?
Oh well, let's find out as we move on.
Yeah, you can't get them anymore. They're all obsolete's gone.
Obsolete, yeah, definitely not coming back. It's interesting. When you think of the Spectrum, everybody thinks about the 48K, but obviously before that, you had the ZX80 and the ZX81, and I mean, they would qualify for this conversation, I reckon.
Yeah.
And they were even smaller, but with the membrane keyboard. Got my A1200 there. That definitely counts, and I guess A real standout is the Acorn Electron with its mechanical keyboard, from back in the day. That's a nice one. Infinitely better than a C64, obviously. Maybe not. I guess the Amiga 500 would be my favorite. And there's another. There's the Acorn Archimedes as well. Obviously, the father of the ARM processor. Now, a few years ago, Apple actually filed a patent for an all-in-one computer in a keyboard form factor, as if they'd invented it. I'll put a link in the show notes. And have they done anything with that design? Actually, before I answer that question, I mean, the patent actually is around the idea of taking the Magic Keyboard and putting a computer inside that. And if you've got a Magic Keyboard, I've got one here, that is a very thin and very robust design. If they could actually squeeze an entire Mac in that, I would actually be very impressed. Because
you're not going to squeeze an iPhone in there.
I don't know.
Because they're powerful.
It's a very, very, very thin keyboard. But yeah, have they done anything with that design to date? Of course they haven't. Who has, though, is, of course, Raspberry Pi, which is fitting given the ARM lineage. I actually jumped on board with their first one, which was the Pi400, and I used it in stock form for a bit, and then I, of course, wiped the OS and installed Pi by Chris Edwards. Fantastic work. Absolutely awesome upload. And then I sold it when the A500 Mini came out because I didn't see the point in owning both. But since then, they've done a rinse and repeat with the Pi500, and now there's a new buzz in town for the Pi500 Plus. Now, I'd already watched videos on this topic by the excellent Explaining Computers, who, by the way, that guy really should be on TV. Just sounds like he's from Tomorrow's World on the BBC. So he's got a fantastic video on the Pi500 Plus, as does Jeff Geerling. Now, he goes as far as to add, because the Pi500 Plus has an NVMe slot, and he actually adds an external gaming GPU to the mix just to see if it's possible. So that was cool. But thanks to Dr. Local, I've now also seen the video by Lee PSP Video. The Pi500 Plus, yes, it's pretty much, everybody's saying the same thing, it's pretty much twice the price of the Pi500. But it comes with a fully customizable RGB backlit mechanical keyboard, 16 gig of RAM, so that's twice that of the other models, and a 256 gigabyte NVMe SSD. And that's a totally new approach for the Pis, which are usually SD card based. And it comes preloaded on that hard drive with Pi OS, Linux. That's pre-installed, pre-configured. So you can literally just plug this thing in and go, just like the good old days. And while some say, but it's twice the price of a Pi500, I think there's another way to look at this. 16 gigabytes of RAM, 256 gig SSD, which is easily upgradable, by the way. And so CPU aside, that's as good a spec as most modern Macs, except the Pi actually encourages you to upgrade if you want to. So that kind of smacks Apple's offerings with the shame stick right across the face, whilst costing infinitely less. So what do you guys make of the Pi500 Plus? Is it an awesome return to form factor, Jason?
Well, yeah, and Cassie's Tale is here to offer her thoughts as well.
Hello, Cassie.
I love the way cats just show you their butts.
New old cat Cassie there. Yeah, I have almost picked up a Pi400 a couple of times, and so I was intrigued when you were talking about having sort of round tripped already.
Was it too heavy?
Through it. Yes, I needed to work up to it. Picked up as an acquire. But yes, I was interested that you bought it and you were like, meh, I'm just gonna flip this, because I kind of decided that there's a difference between buying old computers aspirationally, and I say, I'm going to learn how to use this old computer. I'm really going to, and then buying new computers aspirationally. And I think all of us listening probably fall into the demo of having that older Pi that there's a thing we know we're going to do with it, and it's just kind of sitting there waiting. So decided to cut myself off of buying keyboard all-in-ones for that. But yeah, the comparisons with Macs were interesting because, right, the specs on that look very similar to a contemporary Mac Mini, entry level 16 gigs of RAM, 256 gigs storage, ARM based processor, a couple of USB-Cs to get your I/O going, and a mere $200. So that is pretty interesting. Better specs are better. Tough to Tough to put that any other way. Do we know, like, I know, mechanical keyboard takes in a lot of ground. Like, so for people that, were kind of put off by the Pi500, do we know how much of a step up this keyboard is in terms of, making you happy to use it?
Oh, compared to, from all the reviews I've seen, compared to using the standard Pi400 or 500, which is just a flat membrane keyboard, very similar to actually the Magic Keyboard or this cheap piece of rubbish that I've got from Kmart here. Everybody's praising the mechanical keyboard. I can't remember exactly which switches it uses, but they're proper switches. You can't change out the switches, but you can change out the keycaps. They're compatible with existing keycap sets. It's a proper, legit mechanical keyboard. Yeah.
That makes a big difference, I think. The Apple-style chiclet keyboard, which for some reason people are moving on to PCs as if that's a good keyboard, can get in the bin if you ask me. I want a full travel proper keyboard with a numerical keypad on it. But no, I do like the mechanical keyboard. The question I've got for it, though, does it have an internal battery that's doomed to leak like an A500 Plus? Because anytime I see 500, the Pi500 Plus, I think of Amiga A500 Plus. The Plus in the Pi range, I believe, refers to the BBC Model B Plus, because the Raspberry Pi is, they're always trying to hark back to the BBC Micro because that's their foundations. But yeah, I like this. And we're getting to the point where a cheap, basic computer can do incredible amounts. And this can be all the computer a normal person needs. And I say normal, I mean, if you're listening to this, you're not. Nobody here is normal. But if you just want something like my dad, for example, to watch a bit of YouTube, to go onto his bank account, to send email, to sync pictures from his whatever there, all those kind of tasks can be done absolutely competently by this and more. If you want an emulation station, though, if you want a separate, if you are listening to this and you aren't normal, and you want to play old games, and you want an emulation set up somewhere that's away from your normal computer, then this does it all, and it's absolutely incredible. And I've been coming at this a kind of a different way to do the same thing. I have a Pixel 9 Pro phone, or Pixel 9 phone. I think is it a Pixel 9 Pro? No, it's the 512 meg, whatever it is, 512 gigabyte one. I've got a Pixel phone, and they've just launched a new desktop docking mode for it. So in my kitchen on the breakfast bar, I have a dock which is connected to an Ethernet cable, a proper keyboard, a mechanical one, a mouse, and a fairly modest portable monitor. And I can plug my phone in and bang, it's a desktop, and it's powerful enough. And it's probably, I don't know if it's along the lines of this Raspberry Pi, but it should be up there with it. And I wonder if the desktop is not relevant for most people now because of a phone, and then having either this or something to plug in, which is fundamentally the same chips inside them. We're going to end up with this where the traditional box just isn't needed.
It's interesting you say it, because we've talked about this before, the whole idea of, by now, surely you can just sit at your desk and your phone will know that's where you are, and you can use a keyboard, proper screen, proper mouse. And because why do you need so many devices, Jason?
Two questions for you, because I haven't stayed super on top of the Pi ecosystem, but I do remember like some of the projects that I was the most interested in don't have versions beyond the 3 because the architecture changed. It was harder to do things, bare metal and things like that. So I guess, sort of two questions. Do you know if that's changed at all? And with these enhanced specs, like, again, thinking of like kind of this week in retro type uses, is there a kind of killer app, emulator, something like that this unlocks that would have struggled even on the original 500?
I guess if you're using MAME, then there are some things that don't run fast enough.
Yeah.
So that'll be helped, but we're talking kind of edge case stuff. I think it will already do. Emulation wise, I think a 500 or a 400 would already do almost everything you needed. So this is probably a bit overkill that way. But there will be, I just don't know enough about the later console emulations to know, but I've got a feeling there may be console emulation, which was beyond a 400, which is now maybe with a 500 plus that's now possible. But I'm guessing here, I just don't know enough to say.
Well, on that point, so the video by Lee, which is the one that was posted in the subreddit, he goes on to, which the other videos I mentioned didn't, he goes on to talk about how you can do, multi-menu boot on this thing. And, so he talks about booting into RetroPie and that kind of thing and how you can configure it. So, yeah. But I do think, it's the same as all the other Pis in terms of when there's a new iteration. Well, this is the same as any other Pi5. But so it's a case of Pi 3 to Pi 4, there's issues. Pi 4 to Pi 5, there's issues. But it's such a big community now. I think the interesting thing about the Pi now is that we still, let's look at this conversation. We see it as a hobbyist thing, right? And we know they're used in education as well. But they're now at that point, with this one in particular as well, where it's just a usable desktop, depending on your requirements. And even with the Pi500, was it Danwood? It might have been Danwood. I know somebody put a video out about whether you could use the Pi500 to do video editing. And yes, to a point you could. Right? I mean, that's up there. That really is up there for such an affordable device. That's pretty amazing.
Just a shame they didn't invent the form factor.
It's true. Well, going back to that, when I sold my Pi500, I then saw a video by Danwood about a build that ran Risk OS from the Acorn Archimedes. And I had instant regret. I wish I'd kept my Pi400 and installed that because I think that's a very fitting use for a Pi. It's a great way to investigate also a hard-to-get system in emulation. Going back to the form factor, though, I do like Cider, but Apple filing a patent for something they didn't invent and haven't done anything with anyway just seems like a case of rotten apples. I'm really glad the Pi500 and the Pi500 Plus are things, and they're super affordable. I absolutely love my M4 MacBook Air, but it's times like this that I'm reminded that there are other options, and I think the Pi500 Plus has just brought the A game. So I've kind of gone off cider. I think I'm going to start fermenting raspberries.
We are sponsored this week, thank you very much, by PCBWay.com. Manufacturers of PCBs the way you want them to be, but also CNC milling. They will pick and place your PCBs for you. They will do 3D printing. But what we like the most, the unique selling point about PCBWay is their shared project library, where you can find solutions to problems you have, solutions to problems you didn't know you had, and projects if you want to do something interesting. Like Jason, for example, have you found one for this week?
Yeah, it's like having your own engineering and R&D department. It was intrigued by the PCW GoTech mod, a PCB that when connected to a GoTech floppy replacement programmed with flash floppy software allows the GoTech to correctly respond to the Amstrad PCW's floppy controller signals. We were just talking about Dave trying to electrocute himself on a PCW the other week, weren't we?
I haven't done yet, but I will at some point. And I'm wondering if do I want to have physical? I so much like physical drive. Don't like GoTechs, but do I want to have one physical drive and one GoTech? I don't know. So maybe I'll do this one. Yeah, maybe I'll do it.
This one will solve some pending issues, and it has an optional piezo buzzer, so you can think about that.
As it loads, yeah. That was my impression of a disk drive, a 3-inch one.
So we've got the RP2040, the little Raspberry Pi microcontroller module dealio. There's an I2C scanner. The long and the short, it says the description here. This PCB uses an RP2040 and an OLED, scans continuously for attached I2C devices, and displays the address. Perfect for scanning dubious devices from a different vendor that we won't name here. And there's also an updated Hackberry Pi CM5 shell. This is for the universe of sort of replacement motherboards and stuff like that for older phones. Very cool looking BlackBerry style keyboard on this. If you want yours to look black, you can to tell you how to customize the ordering settings on PCBWay. Tells you the exact screws you're going to need and how to instruct PCBWay to tap the screw holes for you. Like I say, it really is like having your own engineering department. So
thank you very much for sponsoring us, PCBWay.com.
Jordan Mechner, creator of the Prince of Persia and certainly one of the most successful video game creators of the 20th century that you could name, posted recently to the This Week in Retro subreddit. Hey, just saying. So let's talk about Jordan Mechner's post, because this is a story that I've been eyeballing for a little while now, and which still is not completely settled to my satisfaction. So Mechner posted a link to his blog, which is right where you'd expect it to be at jordanmechner.com, to a post that's simply titled A Platform Jumping Prince, which is, of course, a quick way to summarize Prince of Persia, which, if you've never played it, is a clever action exploration puzzler with an easily stated premise. Save the abducted princess within 60 minutes, or else. Prince of Persia was published on almost every platform you could care to name on the market in the late 80s and early 1990s. And Mechner uses this particular post to try to answer what would seem to be a common enough fan question: which is your favorite/definitive version of the original Prince of Persia game? About which he does go on to write a lot of words, but his answer kind of boils down to being the obvious one, his Apple II original, which he worked on at a tremendous amount to get it ready for sale, and which launched his worldwide empire, which entertained a lot of people and helped make him quite wealthy. And it turns into a bit of a delve into Prince of Persia history, including things which were and things which were not. Arguing about video game history is a great pastime for people like us, because it's a topic where there definitely are real facts and real truths, and certain things are documented, but not all of it was super carefully preserved for posterity. Things like choreographed release dates down to a single day for an entire nation or the whole world, that wasn't common until the 1990s. The sales figures and charts that you may be quoting from your favorite magazines, like those real numbers were typically closely guarded. So those charts and trackers that you find in magazines, they may be based more on vibes than actual transactions. Many game developers, producers, and publishers more or less stayed out of the limelight in that era, or by the time that they realized that there was genuine interest in the minute day-to-day details of their work, those people had changed jobs 5 times and moved house twice, and none of that documentation really survived. So before we go back to Jordan Mechner history, do you guys have any favorite guilty pleasure video game history arguments you care to mention?
Yeah, I'll just drop one in here, and I won't discuss it. Chucky Egg is a BBC game.
Oh, interesting.
That has provoked a segment of the audience that's not me.
Yes, not me.
Yeah, it's a BBC. It's really not a BBC Micro game. It's a ZX Spectrum game. But I played it first, the BBC Micro, and it feels so right for the BBC Micro that I think is a BBC Micro game. So it's like Apple inventing the wedge. BBC Micro invented Chucky Egg.
Fair enough. My only comment on this section of the topic is I like going back to a time when we couldn't look up and fact check. I think it's great that people like this are putting the blogs out and putting the facts out. That is awesome. But I also like the pure erroneous nature of just arguing your point based on nothing but your own personal opinion.
Back when you used to go to the pub and someone would tell you something and you'd think, is that true? Maybe it is. These days, you're on Google, that's a load of nonsense, mate.
Daddy Longlegs are the most poisonous spiders in the world.
If they just had fangs that could bite you, and McDonald's burgers are confectionery and all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
Jordan Mechner, as a young man, rocketed to worldwide success and fame with Prince of Persia. He is an exception because Mechner kept meticulous diaries and notes of his game development processes and has shared many of them in recent years in the forms of books, blogs, social posts. And Prince of Persia being the standout game published in 1990, and it took the cinematics and combat concepts from Mechner's earlier, I say karateka, you can say karateka.
Karateka.
Sure. As a little kid, we just called it karateka, and that's what stuck in my head. But he took those concepts that he established in that game in the early 80s and married them into a more athletic and acrobatic hero who, instead of just kind of, walking a straight line and fighting enemies, he's swashbuckling his way, although still in a straight line, but it looks fancier because it's a multi-level dungeon. It's full of traps and puzzles and baddies. And the books that he's written chronicling this process are really a good read. I won't go point by point through the blog post. It's worth a read, and it's not terribly time consuming. But there are some interesting gems in there, like the fact that his initial publishing deal with Broderbund required him to personally deliver, even if somebody else coded them, he was on the hook to actually get them in Broderbund's hands, 3 platform versions of the game. His Apple II original, which was the one that sold the deal in the first place, the Amiga version, and a Macintosh version. And just the story of the Mac version is really fascinating because of how rapidly the form factor and the color capabilities of the Mac were changing around the time that Prince of Persia was trying to get to market. And I say try because that version was delayed. As the Mac itself went from this machine with a teeny tiny, postage stamp black and white screen to, oh, now we have different monitor sizes. Now we have grayscale. Now we have color. So they kept having to change the game and change the assets to try to get it ready for sale. So it ships way behind schedule. But the way he tells the story, Mechner, the timing was probably perfect because that helped attract more attention to a re-release that Broderbund did a couple of years later with souped-up packaging and much better marketing push behind it. So it's very fun and great that Jordan Mechner has done such a great job documenting his work and even now continues to engage with us, his audience, on his recollections and such. But I mentioned that I've been tracking the story for a while for a specific reason. Back in August, on Twitter, Mechner made an offhand remark about why there was never a Commodore 64 version of Prince of Persia on Twitter. And because there wasn't.
Because the Commodore 64 is rubbish. That's right, isn't it?
Well, that's kind of what he said. He said, well, it was old and Broderbund couldn't sell any games for it anymore. And so, we didn't bother. And some of us out there said, excuse me, sir, this game came out on Game Boy, Game Gear, Sega Master System, let alone his original beloved Apple II, which, by the way, although it needed a 128K, Apple IIe or Apple IIc or equivalent, it's still like the Apple II is just straight up an older platform than the C64 by several years. So when some of us kind of raised our hands and said, excuse me, sir, it doesn't quite track with what you just said about the other thing, he kind of just said, the platform was too old and inflexible, and Broderbund said they couldn't sell any retail copies. And I said, well, okay, but there's this fan-ported Commodore 64 version over here, and that came out close to 15 years ago now, actually. And it does require a large, cheap storage cartridge. In other words, like the cartridge isn't doing anything fancy, it just stores a bunch of game data. And that the concept of that cartridge did exist in Mechner's time when this game was being developed. So that's kind of point one where people are like, wait a minute, this seems like it's perfectly possible and playable. But then there's also the fact that Broderbund published multiple titles for the 64 after Prince of Persia came out. And we probably will never know, like, were those games that they had already contracted by the time they got to talking about a Prince of Persia port? We won't know. But yeah, the fact that there's a port of Prince of Persia to the Sam Coupe, which is a teeny tiny platform, I think the official sales figures on that are in the tens of thousands, maybe. So market size alone was not the issue. But Mechner on Twitter said, I will address this in this blog post. He has now made the blog post. He's told us about it on our subreddit. So here's what he said. Quote, by 1990, Broderbund and most US retailers considered the C64 and Apple II outdated platforms. Sales numbers were dwindling by the month. Broderbund couldn't escape is publishing Prince of Persia on Apple since it was the lead platform I created the game on, but they had little interest in a C64 version. It would have been a tough port in any case. To fit Prince of Persia into 64K of memory with the Commodore's technical limitations needed an ACE 6502 programmer. And then he went on to talk about the 64 port that came out in 2011. And then there's a Commodore Plus 4 port that came out pretty recently. And he says, I hope that my Apple II source code was helpful, which he's published since then. So he's addressed it, and he's addressed it in a way that tracks, like he essentially gave this game to Broderbund and said, hey, if you want a DOS version, Mac version, Amiga, Atari, you're going to have to put my baby out. You're going to have to put the Apple II version out. That story, that tracks. I completely buy that. The technical arguments, and the what about, that can go on forever. But it's super cool that we still have these guys around to ask these questions and that they're answering. But obviously, even for people who did a great job, keeping diaries and so forth, like Mechner, there are gaps in the history. Any comparisons spring to mind to other? It's nice that these guys are still around, but maybe they're not 100% authoritative on topics that they haven't thought too much about for the past 35, 40 years. Phenomena.
Yeah, the big example for me is Trip Hawkins and Richard Garriott. Trip Hawkins was the the head of EA back when they were not just FIFA every year, another 60 quid, please. Or John Madden, whatever it is.
Madden.
Is it John Madden? Is it John
They
Madden?
just call it Madden. No, it went from John Madden football now to just Madden.
It wasn't Patrick Madden or anything. It was definitely John. That's fine.
It was definitely John.
I said John Madden. I thought, did I get that right? Trip Hawkins was in charge of EA when they bought Origin Systems, which was Richard Garriott at Ultima. And my friend Neil, former host on here, interviewed both of them. And he interviewed them at different times. And he interviewed Trip Hawkins, and he asked questions about EA and Origin. And he interviewed Richard Garriott, and he asked questions about EA and Origin. And both of their answers sounded quite good, but they couldn't quite exist together in the same world. So I think it's perspective and memory and retelling stories, and it comes out quite interesting. And I wouldn't like to say either of them is wrong. I think that's just the truth from their perspective, because there's a lot of accusations made that EA were stifling the companies they bought, and they did buy lots of companies and they didn't all survive. Did any survive, really? It's very interesting when you look at that perspective. And the one that I wish Neil did have Peter Molyneux booked in, but Peter Molyneux stood him up twice. So he's not going to interview him. But again, it would be nice to hear Peter Molyneux's talk about his earlier games, because people only want to talk about, he wants to talk about his newest project, and people want to talk about his biggest failures. But I think his earlier games are much more interesting. So yeah, that's mine.
I think mine, it has to be John Romero. As you're talking about, this guy's justification for why he hasn't done a C64 port. I'm just thinking, this is just parallel with why was there not a port of Doom for the Amiga, right?
John
and
Carmack,
we understand
John
why.
Carmack.
Yeah, John Carmack, and also. But yeah, they then later went on to, do it for the Jaguar, which was a totally failed system. So it wasn't about market share, and the SNES. So it also wasn't about the capability of the system either. So, but at the end of the day, they had to make, anybody that's in the industry, they've got to make decisions at the time based on what they think is going to be successful and what's going to sell. And so we understand that. But yeah, that's my parallel here.
Yeah, I would be fascinated to know what the financial arrangements were for some of the more oddball or unlikely ports of Prince of Persia. Sam Coupe, obviously, and the CPC, which was not a massive seller, and we're talking about a Europe-only platform. Dave, you had a sharp inhalation of breath. What were you going to say?
The Sam Coupe, my thoughts on the Sam Coupe were, at the time it was released, it was thought by some people to be the successor to the ZX Spectrum. Here's your ZX Spectrum compatibility, and here's it doing more. It didn't succeed, but it was possible they green-lit the port of Prince of Persia because they thought it was going to be, because at the point that happened, it hadn't yet flopped.
Yeah, I mean, I find it extraordinarily unlikely that Jordan Mechner and Broderbund, two U.S.-based individuals and outfits, are saying, "Oh, that Sam Coupe, that's really gonna capitalize on the Spectrum market." They didn't care about that. That was meaningless to them.
It's the only explanation I can think of that has any.
Well, I mean, the answer to all our questions is money. Somebody coughed up a lot of money to make it happen and make it worth their while. But because Mechner points out just how many platforms the original Prince of Persia was ported to. And he was a very good negotiator, so he got paid well for each one. We do know that, even though, as he puts it, some of those offshore ports were done without his involvement. And the way he puts it, quote, "Usually by the time someone handed me a controller to play test a build, it was too late for my feedback to matter, so I rarely played beyond the first level or two." And he goes on to talk about how the Super Nintendo version was a nice exception to that rule, because they had enhanced it so much that he was able to play levels he hadn't designed and stuff like that, and he really dug it. The fact that the Commodore 64 version does work as well as it does, despite it was not ported from the source code that he did allow to be released. It was done as a brute force conversion. But the fact that it works well, and that there was still a decent software market for the 64 in 1990, 91, it does create a massive what if, would it have materially impacted Mechner's standard of living or Broderbund's survivability? The answer is to both, probably not. But the fact that he dismissed the prospect as being too commercially narrow to make sense, while acknowledging in his own post the Sam Coupe port, which a machine with a teeny tiny number of machines out, that all seems very strange. But there's no great answer to this or many other game history questions, unfortunately. Other reflections on Prince of Persia from your gaming past or even present? Do you guys still play it today?
Yeah, it's an amazing game. We haven't really mentioned, and I get why you've not mentioned it, because explaining it all is there, the rotoscoping, him videoing his brother and all the rest of it, and the human movement in Prince of Persia is unlike what anything we've seen before, apart from karateka, whatever you call it, because it looks like what human movements looks like rather than someone designing a sprite from scratch. It's an amazing looking game, and it's an amazing, even more when you look beneath the surface to what's actually going on and how it was made. But I always struggled with Prince of Persia with the UI of it, because I would want my guy to do something and he wouldn't do what I wanted him to do. I'd want him to edge forward and he would say, right, I'm just going to step off this ledge and die. I'd want him to jump up and he wouldn't. So I always get frustrated with that, and I don't know if I just didn't play it enough because of that. It was on my Atari ST, which is a wonderful port of it. Last week you talked about yoke controls, and I never had an issue with yoke controls. Using a yoke or a joystick to play X-Wing or whatever, I never had an issue. And I couldn't work out, I'm listening last week, and I'm thinking, what way does it work? Are they inverted or not? And I don't know, because I just go, and it's intuitive, I play them. And I don't know if I play games with inverted and not inverted, or if I've only played inverted games, or whether I just pick it up, work out which way it's going, and that's fine, my brain adjusts to it perfectly. But for a joystick, no, it couldn't. So the yoke's on, yeah. The yoke's fine, joystick isn't, yeah. I don't know why the CPC got a port. CPC was a 1985 computer. By 1990, it was still going about, I mean, especially in France, but I don't understand that. And just, they must have been not quite well informed when they were making these decisions and made some questionable ones.
The only thing I can think is that there was enough. Somebody said, we'll guarantee you X number of sales. And so he said, okay. Chris?
Don't know. Yeah. Quite interesting, though.
Yeah. I've got a lot of love for Prince of Persia, probably because I believe it was the first game I played once I jumped from Amiga to PC. I have to fess up here. I didn't buy a copy. It was a pirate copy handed to me by a youth leader, funnily enough.
Well, if you ask Jordan Mechner on Reddit, he'll give you his PayPal address and you can send him the money.
Oh, I can send him the money now. Fantastic. It was just...
Where's that Reddit, Dave?
Reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro.
If it's good enough for Jordan Mechner, it's good enough for you.
Yeah. Awesome. But yeah, I loved it for the same reasons Dave's mentioned as well, in terms of the rotoscoping animation. It just looks so good. And even though by the time I got into PC, this was now, the game was a few years old, it was sort of a justification of, okay, yes, this can play games. This PC can play games. It was a used PC, and yeah, really enjoyed it. And I think it's just because it's a really accessible game. Like, it's a really easy point of entry. The controls, despite what Dave just said, they're for the most part intuitive, apart from having to sneak up to the edges of ledges before making a jump and stuff like that. The puzzles are challenging, but not too much. It's just great. It's just a lovely, accessible game that you can just play for hours. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, that rotoscoping, which means basically you take a video, film of somebody doing the thing, and then you essentially, project it on a wall or whatever, and then trace what they're doing, what they look like. Also, why the golfer in Leaderboard looks so good. He's also a rotoscoped guy.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Did not know that. Yeah,
that's where I first learned about it, and then kind of learned later. Oh, the guy in Karateka, he's been rotoscoped. Oh, okay, but yeah, first learned about it for
Leaderboard.
Oh, there you go.
So, yeah, one of the things that sets Mechner apart was that he wasn't afraid of 8-bit technology. Obviously, he beat the Apple II into submission to do this game, but he also wasn't afraid of people. And I think that helped him make some fantastic deals for his clever games that people just as talented and inventive maybe didn't get and didn't get to enjoy so much of the fruits of their labor. But it's also helped keep him an active part of the community today. And you are welcome on our subreddit anytime, sir. So Dave has a note here that says there were no YouTube comments about him being missing last week. That's not true. People were asking, where's Dave? Why didn't Dave get to talk about Baldur's Gate 2? So we'll have none of that, Dave.
Yeah, I really did enjoy Baldur's Gate 2. Shame I missed that. Yeah, I enjoyed my week off. One of my cats went in and is now far less likely to be a father. But there was other things I had to do as well. Yeah, that's right. But it's nice to be back. It was nice to be a listener once, though. It was nice to be a listener for a change. On to news in brief, unless there's any other housekeeping.
Well, did you enjoy the episode so much that it might have inspired you to become a patron of the show?
Yes, if I wasn't doing this, I would become a patron. Yes.
How would you do that, Chris?
Me? You go to patreon.com/This Week in Retro.
That's
Very
right.
Good.
Well done.
And
Well done. Thank you to our twirlers. Thank you to our supporters. On to news and briefs. And the top submission in the subreddit this week is a question from Sybil66 asking, what tech is your pinup? And they've put a picture of a Commodore 710. Is that right? Not 710? 710?
I would call it the 710, yes.
710.
Commodore 710 with a disk drive. For me, I think it's an X68K, the black Pro model, the twin tower thing. I think that looks amazing. You guys have an opinion? What's the best looking?
A500.
I'll just say the next cube. I don't even think I mean it, but the next cube. Why not?
I think you have to, don't you?
Yeah.
I think you're obliged to say that.
Antiques for Geeks tells us that Golden Axe is being ported to the Atari 2600.
I can't wait for that. Squelch 411 link, or 411 if you like, or 411. Yeah, links us to a video from Phil's computer lab on more Pico Gus improvements.
Oz RetroComp links us to an interview of Sir Clive Sinclair in 2019. So this would be many, many years after he left the Sinclair business, and 2 years before he passed away. And I guess this is a video interview. Does that make it a doco? Is that a doco, Chris?
That'd be a doco.
Doco.
It's a doco. That'd be interesting, yeah. Pajako tells us the EA, the Destroyer of Worlds, stock is up 15% in rumours they're going to go private. Who knows? But maybe by the time this is out, it may have already happened, or maybe it won't have happened.
Or maybe it will have not happened. It will have been, this was all nonsense. We don't know.
We don't have a clue.
The problem with us recording it 5 days before you hear it is it might be out of date by the time you get it. So out of date news for out of date tech.
Well, speaking of people and things that don't go out of style, Pajako links us to a Tom's Hardware article on upgrading a 3DFX Voodoo card with a whopping 12 megabytes of RAM and 2 texture mappers.
Everyone loves a Voodoo. There is lots more in the subreddit. If you'd like to go and have a look through what's there, submit your own articles, kill some time, then go to reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. Regular listeners might remember me saying there's two routes to games, text adventures and arcade-style games, and everything is built on those ancient foundations. And I still think that's mostly true. Although I'm not sure if it's really meaningful now. I don't think it matters now. Once you get past the mid-'80s at the kind of the latest, the descendants of those two types of games have evolved and crossed paths and merged so many times. And we've got this amazing world of games now with much more variety than what anyone could have imagined back in the 70s when video gaming was really starting to gear up for its massive growth. The text adventure, though, is what started it for many people is Advent or Adventure. And that's the text adventure based on the Bedquilt Bedquilt Cave in Kentucky in the USA. But you might know it as the Colossal Cave Adventure or the Original Adventure or Level 9's trilogy, or Microsoft Adventure, or the biggest name of them all, Zork. They're all clones or copies or implementations of what was on that mainframe. Zork is what got Infocom up and running. So MIT students making it on a mainframe and then deciding to go commercial with it. And I've always been fascinated with Infocom because they made this massive impact in gaming history in a short number of years, and were going, and their commercial viability was plummeting by the time I was old enough to want to play their games. They try to use the text adventures as a kind of leg up to go into business software, and it went really badly for them in 1985. And by 1986, they were on their knees financially and bought out by Activision. And in 1987, I feel they released their last proper roster of text adventures, and they only followed up a few thereafter. So they were kind of mostly all done in the mid-80s by the time I would start to look into things. So it's a common trope in fantasy and science fiction to have this elder race that came out and died, leaving all their artifacts behind. And that's how Infocom feels for me. It feels a bit like how text adventures feel for me, because I didn't really get into them so much until I get tired of action games and I wanted something a little different creatively. So I always felt maybe text adventures were the first retro that I ever did. Today we're talking about a link submitted by Indigo Prime, and it's to something called the Obsessively Compulsive Complete Infocom Catalogue. And it's just that. And I'll need to explain that it's more than it sounds. It's not actually a new thing. I was aware of this a long time ago, and I've used it myself. I believe it was started based on the work of Jason Scott, who is the Internet Archive guy, who's so many different things, Get Lamp, all the rest of it. And it's been taken over by someone else now. And it's a combination. It's a combining of all the different versions of all the different Infocom games. Now, Infocom's success was down to them creating an engine for text adventures, which they could then reuse in the next one. That also meant that as more and more micros appeared on the market, Infocom, unlike Broderbund, could quickly get an engine going for each and easily port their games to every micro that had a disk drive without saying, no, this micro doesn't get this game. And I really hope I get all this next bit right. And Jason's here to correct me, I'm sure. And if not, the comments. They used ZIL, Z-I-L, as a language, which is Zork Interpreted Language, which then was turned into Z code and then could be used on a ZIP, a Zork Interpreter program. So they made the games in ZIL, they turned them into Z code, and they made a ZIP for each computer they wanted to play the games on. So if they had a ZIP, and they had for a computer, then they could just make all their games into the Z code to run on the ZIP. Is that right?
That's right.
No corrections. Fantastic. If you're more familiar with later adventure type games, like thinking of LucasArts games, for example, think of what they did with Scum. Infocom did that earlier. As the Infocom games turned from text adventures into interactive fictions, if you agree with that name, I'm not so sure. Sometimes I think interactive fiction is a little bit, we're not text adventures. But they did change. The Zork was quite basic in terms of description compared to the later stuff, which was really quite creative. They got more complex. They got more verbose with a larger vocabulary and a parser that was better handled for that and other in-game events. And they even eventually added graphics. So that meant if you were using, that meant you could be playing a game based on Z machine compatible versions from 1 up to 6, and then, although usually 3, and then community made 7 and 8 afterwards. It also means that what I think of as a novel isn't just a one sealed in a box thing. There's additions with bug fixes and changes and so on, and that's what this archive collects. And as time went on, Infocom did things like they built in their own really quite good system of Visi clues. They built that hint system into the games. So the archive there will have versions with and without. Often they were made, the versions of the archive were made in the 90s, because in the 90s, there was the treasures or the lost treasures of Infocom, and then later versions, masterpiece editions. So there were changes to bugs and so on made there. And for some, there was even a final dev release, which was never released to the public. So that means you can grab a Z Engine program like Parchment in a browser, Gargoyle, Fabularium on your phone, and many, many others, and play all of these games in their final best form. There's even notes on if you should avoid the final version or not. For example, Wishbringer, for example, the final version there doesn't work well. What do you guys think?
Jason, you first.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I wanted to just credit Andrew Plotkin, who's the one who maintains the site. Like you said, Dave, it kind
is
of
it him?
sparked. Yeah, or Zarf,
He's
as
great.
he's known in the community.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're
He's
right.
great.
Like it kind of got kicked off when Jason Scott released what they was called the Infocom drive, which kind of is what it sounds like. It was a snapshot of the internal systems at Infocom. And this is you got to know what you're looking at, but Plotkin essentially said, like, well, rather than making people dig through GitHubs where they don't know what they're looking at, if you just want to see, here are the files that you can download and play or try to play for each of these games, he's cataloged all of them there. So yeah, that's how we got here. It's interesting too to see how much work was being done on the games even after they'd been shipped, and there wasn't any obvious need to ship them again. Most of the games have some sort of work in progress that other people at Infocom were tweaking. I did not clock that Wishbringer issue when it was first discussed, apparently a few years ago. But yeah, that is quite a wild bug that actually shipped in a allegedly improved version of the game, but actually made it worse. I did not know about that.
It makes me wonder if it's because when these games were first released in the 80s, they'd be played with by far more people than what would be later played in the re-releases, where they were getting loads of games for not a lot of money and people maybe weren't playing them to the same extent they were back in the 80s. So if they did make a little change that introduced a bug, it may not get picked up.
Yeah, I mean, and right, what was the quality control when they were doing the solid gold editions? Well, obviously not good enough for in the case of Wishbringer, but I think that's the exception for when they did tweak them, of things going really sideways. If you're new to Infocom games, this is not the best place to start. This is definitely for people like us that want to learn more, want to see, oh, well, what did that first grubby version that only testers got to play? What did that look like? There are much better ways to have the experience of what did the packaging look like? What did the included browsies and feelies look like? So this is if you're not sold on these games yet, this is worth maybe scrolling through, but it's not going to fix your gameplay experience for you. But it is a terrific resource, and in the style of somebody who has been publishing on the web since its inception, does have a very cozy HTML 1.0 style. So nothing.
It's reassuring when you see that. It's not generating the page as you're viewing it. It's there. That's what the page is. It's a document. It's great.
No Dreamweaver here.
No, it's brilliant. Chris, did you have anything to say about this? Any thoughts?
Look, I'm not going to pretend text adventure to my thing. I'm still trying to get through Sphinx Adventure, as we all know. So I'm still going to complete that. But what I did find interesting as you were unpacking this, Dave, though, is just learning more about the technology that they built around how to build text adventures and the sort of building in terms of 3D, which I understand better. You build an engine and that allows you to build games faster. And this is sort of the equivalent of that. And building, even though I'm not that into playing text adventures, something that's always been ticking away in the back of my mind is the idea of making my own text adventure, because I think there's no nicer way to world build than with words. So yeah, it's given me some food for thought, that's for sure.
Modern interactive fiction allows so many higher word counts than was possible before. I mean, there's interactive fiction which doesn't need you to do that much. It's more like a choose your own adventure book rather than lots of command type things. There's lots of that going on. Yeah, it's fascinating. So this is a complete archive of every edition, and it's useful to if you know a bit about Infocom, if you want to play a particular Infocom game, you can go there and you can get to the latest version of it. But of course, as Jason said, you really do need the feelies and the browsies to get you immersed in it, to close that imagination gap.
It's time now for the community question of the week. I think we should keep all of that in. So last week's question of the week was WASD or SZXC or even cursor keys, inverted or not inverted? What control setups are you right about and everyone else in the world is wrong, and why? So I think Dave's taken us out of contest mode, I believe.
Yep.
Who's got the top answer, Dave?
Alan P. Thorpe says the big question as a retro fan was whether you would stick the joystick to the desk with the little suction cups or hold it in your hand. Those suction cups were the best for flight sims.
Yes. Yes.
And I would, if you're doing a flight sim, you want a proper flight stick joystick, not a zip stick. But in my hand was the way I did it.
And it's not just that, because on a flight sim, you needed one hand on the joystick and the other hand for the entire keyboard, right? So that's why the suction was so important. Man, it drove me mental if my joystick came unstuck mid-game. Absolutely. Yep, stuck down. Suck it and see.
Jason?
All right. Happy Coding ZX, and I did that on purpose, said QAOPM forever. The only non-heretical divergence is using space instead of M. Yeah, this is a Britishism. We never did that over here.
QAOPM. Oh, that's a Spectrum thing, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And Spider Life says, I'm a lefty, so I use IJKL. Oh, yep, fair enough. Yep, over that side of the keyboard. And then the mouse on the other side. I'm a lefty as well, but you know what? Not when it comes to computers. Never gone there. Weird.
Pajako touched on something. Up for jump. Up for jump is wrong, he says, and unnatural, except Turrican too. He says he's so used to multi-button joypads now that he much prefers a button to jump. I don't know. I played arcade games and I played home computer games, and it never crossed my mind that sometimes I was using a button, sometimes I was using up, and I never seemed to bother about it until people started talking about up for jump is wrong, and then I started to think about it and wonder, is up for jump wrong?
Up for jump, I think it is now that you've got the thing. It's because, we knew the controllers were limited to at the time.
Yeah.
But up for accelerate on racing games, I think that's just as controversial until Lotus came along and said, how about the fire button, guys? Right? And it's like, my God, this is so much better.
Do you know, in I think it's supercars, you can set it, you can change it so it's fire for brake, and your car automatically accelerates, which is the way that every car in the real world should be. They should all switch on, and every car should accelerate unless you put the brake on.
Brilliant.
There's a lot of good answers here if you want to drop by the subreddit and read through people's preferences in controls. And Colony Activist has a great, I'm assuming this is autocorrect. Colony Activist said, I am still with inverted controls. However, I remember Becky, WSAD, was decided on. I struggled with cheap keyboards, and it goes on. I presume that's like back when, but I like that autocorrect turned it into Becky. Becky WSAD.
Becky.
Who's Becky? We should get her on.
Becky.
We should get Becky on the show.
Let's get Becky
Andy,
on the show.
We got good reviews for Andy last week, but Becky's next. Becky, if you're out there, please let us know when you can make it.
So welcome to This Week in Retro. We've got Becky on. So Becky, why? Why WSD? Why is it not ESDF? Why is it not the cursor keys, Becky? Answer.
ESDF,
Becky, tell us. Becky.
What's wrong with ESDF?
That's actually not our question of the week for next week, however.
The question of the week for next week is, do you miss your wedge computer? Would you go back to wedge top computing if you could? Answers in the subreddit. And thank you for joining us this week. We will see you next week, and we'll be arranged. I'll need to book in some guests. I'll be seeing you next week, though. We won't be a guest next week, but we'll be back. Well, maybe if Becky can fit it into her diary, she'll be on next week. Other than that, though, that's us. Thank you.
Thanks, Bex.
Chris is waving, Jason's waving, I'm waving.
I'm in my pajamas. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 AGIMA, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. Please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.